All right, today we're going to dive into a piece of history that honestly sounds more like a mystery novel. It's an incredible story about kings who never really ruled, a nation's history that was built on a complete fabrication, and a question that could seriously shake up how we think about the past.
So right off the bat, we're hit with a puzzle. It seems like a simple question, right? But the answer is anything but simple. I mean, how on earth does the first king with a certain name end up being called the seventh? It just doesn't make any sense.
And this is the guy at the center of it all, King Karl Sverkersson. Now, he ruled Sweden way back in the 12th century, and all the historical records are super clear on this. He was the one and only King Karl in Sweden until the 15th century. So again, why the seventh? What is going on here?
Well, the answer to this riddle isn't just a simple mistake or a typo in some old book. No, this was a full-blown historical fabrication, and one that went completely unnoticed for centuries.
And there it is, the bombshell. The simple, kind of shocking truth is that the first 6 kings named Karl, they were completely made up. They're phantom kings who never ever sat on the Swedish throne.
6. Just let that number sink in for a second. 6 fabricated kings were just inserted into the history books. This wasn't some minor error, it was a huge rewrite of a country's entire past.
So the big question is, how does something like this even happen? How does pure fiction get accepted as historical fact for hundreds and hundreds of years?
Well, we can actually trace this whole thing back to one man, Johannes Magnus. He was a Swedish historian and an archbishop back in the 16th century who, for whatever reason, decided that Sweden's history needed a little spicing up.
And the way he did it was with this book he wrote, a supposedly complete history of all the Swedish kings. It was published after he died, and it laid out the reigns of Karls 1 through 6 in great detail. It was so influential that it actually became the official version of Swedish history.
And just think about how long this lie lasted. The real King Karl died in 1167. Magnus's book didn't come out until almost 400 years later, in 1554. And the official correction? That didn't happen until the late 1700s. For over 200 years, this complete fabrication was taught as the absolute truth.
Now, uncovering this story is fascinating for sure, but it also opens up a much bigger and, frankly, a much more unsettling question. It really forces us to look at all of history with a much more critical eye.
This leads to a really powerful thought. We have solid proof of a huge invention being accepted as fact for centuries. So who's to say this was a one-time thing?
The case of Sweden really makes us think about how we know what we think we know, especially about times like the early Middle Ages. A period where written records are often few and far between, or they come from just a handful of sources. How solid is the historical ground we're standing on, really?
And this is where it gets truly provocative. If 6 Swedish kings could be invented out of thin air, what about other foundational figures from that era? Could giants of history, figures like Charlemagne or Karl the Grosse, also be, either in part or in whole, inventions? The story of Sweden's phantom kings proves that history can be rewritten, and it leaves us wondering, what else might we not know?